Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Co-ops Building a Better World, the podcast brought to you by Co-op News. My name is Rebecca Harvey, and with me today co-hosting is Colin Talbot. Hi, Colin, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. It's
Good.
occasionally sunny.
Does make a difference, doesn't it? It's been
It
really
does.
dry here, but anyway. So, really quickly then, today we're going to be talking about two of the ICA cooperative principles. Principle number two, which is all about democracy, and principle number five, which is about education. So, Colin, let's start with principle five.
Yeah, there's a lot about education in the current issue of the magazine. I counted, I think it's five or six major articles, about 20% of the journal. So it's quite a lot. And two of them are by somebody called Rebecca Harvey. Uh, and both of which I thought were really interesting. One's about schools in Argentina, and the other's about a university in Kenya, which I, being a university person, found fascinating. So, should we kick off with the schools in Argentina and tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Argentina is a fascinating country because, like a lot of countries in on the continent, cooperatives are such a huge part of daily life. People understand what co-ops are. And this year, Argentina in particular is celebrating 80 years of cooperativas escolares, which are the schools cooperatives. And these are a way of learning that was formally set up in 1946 as a way of embedding the teaching and the practice of cooperation, particularly in a school's setting. So in these schools, it's not just an extracurricular activity, although it is completely voluntary if you want to take part. But it's a bit like writing an essay in English or drawing a picture in art. You set up a cooperative. It's just a part of the pedagogy, which is forms, an inherent part of learning in schools in Argentina. What I really love about this is that they are encouraged to take part in these cooperatives from a really, really young age. One of my favorite facts about these cooperatives is the fact that students of any age can participate, but you have to be at least 10 to serve on the board, which I think is absolutely wonderful. And what's also really great is that teachers are involved, but they can veto some decisions, but they're mostly there to guide and to link these cooperative projects to the learning, to different subject lessons, to what's going on in the wider society. And the idea of these co-ops is not just to teach about co-ops, although that is a big part of it, but teaching how to cooperate, how to collaborate, how to work democratically together to solve a problem. So for this article, I listened to an interview with Eva Fernandez. She's the Deputy Director of Community Participation in the Culture and Education Department of Buenos Aires province. And this interview was on Argentina's R10 radio, and we do quote some of it in the article. But in particular, she talks about how real transformations happen from projects that commit students to feeling part of something, creating something, and having collective and solidarity projects. And she talks about how the students really value this learning to work as a team. And one thing she said that really stood out is how a student who may feel apathetic, who didn't feel enthusiastic about school, finds through the cooperative a place to feel part of, to feel happy, to be able to learn through this practice. And these cooperatives that the students set up vary hugely. So they could be a healthy tuck shop, or they could be a gardening initiative, or they could be a pasta and pizza, cookery demonstration. They could build benches, or they could install wheelchair ramps. So it's the students who decide this, along with the teachers who link it to the lessons, which I think is just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, no, I think that form of education, which I've used a lot in higher education, of trying to link practice and theory stuff together, it's
Mm.
really important. The one thing that I did catch from that article was that if we just go back to the early cooperative movement in the UK and the importance of education, at that stage, it was very much cooperatives providing general education to people who didn't have access to it. And there was an element of that, I thought, in the Argentine article, that they were picking out some of the state failure where it wasn't actually providing or people weren't participating in education. Is that correct?
It is partly correct. Yeah, so there are actually two types of schools cooperatives in Argentina. So there's the cooperative set up within the school setting, and then there are schools that set up as cooperative schools, which, as you said, address some of the state failures. So they are slightly different, but both equally valid.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Should we go on to the university? Because I thought that was particularly something for me as a former university professor. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kenya itself is another country where cooperatives are rife and it's brilliant. So Kenya itself has a population of 53, just over 53 million, and it has over 22,000 registered cooperative societies with over 14 million members. The stat that I really like about cooperatives in Kenya is they contribute about 45% of Kenya's GDP. So they're a big business. And I think this is reflected in this issue of Co-op News actually, because the story we ran on the Cooperative University of Kenya is actually one of four stories we ran on the country this issue. So we talked about savings and credit co-ops, we talked about the restructure of the Co-op Bank of Kenya, and we also talked about tea and coffee co-ops joining a campaign to stop child labour in the supply chain, which is part of a wider national effort. But for the university piece, I got to speak to Professor Kamau Gamau, who's the Vice Chancellor of the Cooperative University of Kenya. And I asked him what cooperative education means to him. And I really enjoyed his answer because he said it's for him it's an integrated learning model. I really like that idea of being integrated. So an integrated learning model that deliberately combines academic instruction with practical work-based experience offered within co-op enterprises or community-based economic structures. So today the university teaches about 8,000 students, and the level of education varies from diplomas and undergraduate to both postgraduate and professional development courses. But for him, what really struck me was when he was talking about it, he talked about it's a vision to have cooperative education become a mainstream pillar of education systems and to have this socio-economic transformation of both people, both locally and globally. And similar to what how was happening in Argentina, it's very much linking the cooperative practice within the education setting to the outside world. So in Argentina, it was about making sure that, young children and older children are prepared to be citizens of the country and of the world. Whereas at the university, it's all about preparing students for the changing world of work. And this world is changing. And in particular, he was talking about the environmental changes or the impacts that environmental changes will have on the world of work, and also the impact of technology and how both of these are going to underpin huge changes for career paths for their students. And one of the other things he said was how co-op education is already intersecting with digital innovation, green economics, and social enterprises, and will become a critical model for addressing 21st century challenges. So one of the things similar to the Argentina schools um, is that the university pushes student participation in designing and managing cooperative projects within the university setting and then linking up with co-op businesses outside the university too.
that's really interesting. My old business school, Manchester Business School, was actually founded in the 1960s on what were called action learning principles, which is about combining practical projects with the sort of classroom teaching bit of what we did. And they still do actually. They run quite a lot of for MBA students have to form a consortium, which is actually like a mini cooperative, and they give advice to not-for-profit organisations, mostly in the Manchester area. So, and I've supervised two or three of them. There was one with a demining charity that's based in Manchester, which was really interesting.
Let's stick with kind of university business education as well then, because I know last or a few weeks ago, Colin, you spoke with Ilana Gotz, who's the project manager at EURICSI, which is the European Research Institute on Cooperative and Social Enterprises. But she's also the Global Secretariat of the International Cooperative Business Education Consortium.
Yeah, absolutely. There's about 25 business schools on covering most continents, uh, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a start of business schools that are doing cooperative education um, in quite active in North America and some parts of Europe, Italy, for example. Um, and what they're trying to do is to try and form a core of people who are active in this area. So I recorded an interview with Ilana, which we're going to play now. I'd like to welcome to our cooperative news podcast Ilana Gotz, who's from ICBEC, which focuses on business education for cooperatives. So, but I'll leave Ilana to introduce it.
Thank you so much, Colin, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. So, yeah, here we're talking about education, cooperative business education. ICBEC is the International Cooperative Business Education Consortium. We are a network of educators, researchers, supporters, people interested in cooperative business education from all around the world. And we've been operating for a few years now, and our main purpose is to bring together those people working in cooperative business education to help network, share experiences, compare notes, like like teachers want to do, and um, and really make sure that we're all aware of what's going on in the education sphere and doing the best we can to bring cooperative business education to cooperatives around the world.
That's great. As somebody who spent most of my education career in business schools, I know how little cooperative education there is, certainly in Britain. I know some other countries do it a bit better than us, but I've been looking around recently and there's 120 business schools in Britain, and as far as I'm aware, only about two or three of them at most do anything at all about cooperatives.
Yeah, the fragmentation and the lack of cooperative business education in many business schools is certainly one of the reasons why a network like ICBEC is useful. So we have a core group of 25 members. We're housed at St. Mary's in Canada, and I am actually my work is through Eurixe, a research center in Trento, Italy. We focus on social economy, on cooperatives, social enterprises, associations, foundations, and are also a training organization. And so we've been one of the members since the beginning, and we provide the secretariat for the ICBEC network, myself and my colleague, Maria Murillo. But we have members from all around the world. Some of the activities that we focus on, our areas of work, is really about trying to make sure that we stay in touch with one another and have an idea about what kinds of programs exist around the world. You know, it could be that somebody comes to me, but it's not what we do. And so then I know where I can refer that person. Also to do collaborative initiatives. We have a repository of resources and case studies that is being offered through the Portel Co-op at HEC Montreal. So that's a really exciting opportunity. And yeah, I mean, it's really about sharing and building those connections around the world.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously necessary. One other thing I have noticed is there's been a bit of a surge in publications over the last decade or so about cooperatives. Quite a lot of books, um, which my shelves are filling up with quite rapidly, trying to keep up with. I mean, maybe you should say something more about the membership, how broad it is.
Sure. So here's a map of the core members. So we have the membership structure is basically you can be a member if you are contributing either financially or through your activities and your participation in the ICBEC network. But it's not limited to organizations. We also welcome individual teachers, professors, researchers, and we have a much broader list of people who are sort of in our mailing list and network who receive our information. But we're well aware that not every institution is able to contribute financially. So, but these are the core members, the ones that really are contributing either economically or by participation and in kind. And as you can see, they're really all around the world. So it's very exciting to have a network like this, and we're constantly building new connections. So anyone who's
But
interested is welcome to to reach out.
I think the point about individuals being able to join in is really important because, in my experience, in a lot of cases, it's only two or three individuals in a business school or other part of a university that might be interested in either co-ops or the social economy. I wonder if you could just expand a bit on the sort of activities the network gets up to, because I gather you have various sorts of activities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the basic activities are, we have our meetings, our plenaries, and regional meetings so that people can get to know each other, talk to one another, especially, as you mentioned, individuals, they might feel kind of alone in their research or their work or their teaching. And so, one of the key activities is really just connecting people to one another. But we're also working towards more collaborative initiatives. So right now we have a case study initiative going on that is being headed by University of Saskatchewan, the Cooperative Center in University of Saskatchewan. We're working together with Ivy Publishing to make business case studies available to both those who are looking for cooperative business case studies, but also those who might just be looking for a case study on governance or participation or management or whatever it might be, and then happen upon a cooperative, opening the door to teaching about cooperatives where maybe they weren't going to initially. So it's really about providing materials for those who are already teaching about cooperatives, but also trying, as we're constantly talking about, and you and I have talked about in the past, that lack of teaching of the cooperative business model in business schools and in other programs. So that's an initiative that we're doing across the entire ICBEC network. And part of that is also teaching about how to write a good case study, how to get a case study published. These kinds of, we're talking with the ICA, the International Cooperative Alliance Asia Pacific office about doing a case study competition, for example. So a whole lot of work around that. And then we interact with other networks as well. We're involved with the ICA and the research network, the MS network in Europe, and others, really just trying to make sure that people who want to be teaching about cooperative business have the resources to do it. They can, find materials, and then also are sharing what's going on.
That's all fantastically useful. Thanks very much. That's, dare I say, educational. I'm sure quite a few people will find that particularly useful. And I hope I'll be able to participate in some of the things you're doing. By the way, the
Of course.
two things about the magazine. One is in the last issue, I did a review of the book by Bruno Roelants on workers' cooperatives that's just come out, which has got a lot of case studies in it, which is quite useful. And
Yeah.
the other is that this May issue of the magazine is heavily focused around educational issues, so people might find that particularly useful. But thanks very much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And here, if folks can see it, is our contact information. And we're on LinkedIn. We have a web page. We have a Lumio community, which Lumio, if you don't know it, it's a cooperative platform. And you can join the conversation there. So thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ilana.
If you're enjoying this podcast, why not consider becoming a member of Co-op News? As well as writing and talking about co-ops, we are a multi-stakeholder cooperative ourselves. For individual membership, visit thenews.coop/membership. Or if your organisation would like to become a direct member, email membership@thenews.coop to find out more about joining the heart of the co-op conversation. Okay, let's move on to principle number 2 now. So, democratic participation. So, we're recording this on Friday, the 8th of May. And yesterday in the UK, there were a lot of local elections. And democratic participation is a core co-op principle.
Yeah, I've been recently reading the guidance notes produced by the International Cooperative Alliance, and there's quite extensive note about what they mean by Principle 2. And it actually mentions some democratic innovations which are very popular in political democracy, but less so, I think, inside the cooperative movements. Um, uh, we're going to go on to talk about some of that now with Alice.
So joining us today, we have a very special guest, and that is Alice Toomer McAlpine, who is a co-op news journalist, who actually is also the fantastic person who edits the podcast. So Alice, thank you so much for all your work on this so far. Meanwhile, you've written quite a lot about different forms of democratic participation for co-op news. So what are some of these different forms that have really stood out for you?
Yeah, so obviously it's just really fascinating that there is so many different types of democracy that happen within co-ops and that they are, inherently democratic organizations. And yeah, I've been quite interested in this. So one of the stories that I wrote a while back was about sociocracy, which some listeners or viewers might be familiar with. So sociocracy, for those who don't know, is it's a form of organizing work, really, but in a democratic way. So I spoke to an organization called Sociocracy for All, who are based in the US, and they talk about sociocracy as being it's not non-hierarchical, but they talk about it being a hierarchy of work rather than power. And so you can go as deep as you want into sociocracy. So the way that it works in a kind of nutshell is that sociocratic organizations are made up of working groups called circles. And the idea is that these circles are semi-autonomous, so they get the jobs done that they need to get done, but they're always in constant communication with each other. So a lot of it is about kind of trying to devolve and decentralize decision making to the people that are actually doing the work. So it's a really interesting innovation, and it's been taken on by quite a lot of co-ops, quite a few worker co-ops and housing co-ops as well. One of the most notable examples that we spoke to in the story that I wrote was Unicorn Grocery in Manchester. And they started thinking about sociocracy as they were growing. So they got to the point where I think they had about maybe like 70 worker members, and the working groups that they were already using were starting to get a little bit unwieldy. So they were having kind of group meetings with like 20 people in, for example, their deli working group or their vegetables working group, and they decided that they needed something that had a bit more structure to kind of facilitate the values of collective decision making. So they've been working with sociocracy for a while now, and it seems to be quite a valuable tool. But as I said, it's something that you can go into a lot of detail with, or you can just kind of try and apply the principles. So that's one kind of interesting thing that I've seen in, quite a few worker co-ops and maybe like co-ops on the smaller side. Another thing that I found quite interesting was in the kind of community area of co-ops is this idea of assemblies. And this is something that I've been learning about for the past few months in various different areas of my life. But I attended a conference last year called The World Transformed. And at that conference, there was a session run by an organization called Cooperation North, and they are kind of a network of cooperative networks. And they hosted an event that was about local assemblies, community assemblies at this conference. And it was hosted by Cooperation Manchester, Cooperation Hull, and Cooperation Sheffield. And they kind of took us through the process of how to run a local assembly, which is really about people in a community coming together to make decisions, plan action, take action together, and sometimes pool resources. And that's a key organizing tool that those organisations use.
So Corporation North, Corporation Hull, Corporation Manchester, are they inspired by Corporation Jackson in the USA at all?
Yes, they are. So, Cooperation Jackson, for those who don't know, is a cooperative network in Jackson, Mississippi, and it consists of four interconnected institutions that they are like actively trying to build now. So the first one is a federation of local worker co-ops. The next one is a cooperative incubator. The next one is a cooperative education and training centre, and then also a cooperative bank or some kind of financial institution. So they're really trying to create a new society essentially in the area that they're working in, and they've inspired lots of other organisations to go on and do similar things. And yeah, that includes Cooperation North and the organisations that are part of that. And Cooperation Jackson, yeah, also promotes assemblies as a key instrument in their organising model. And Callie Okuno, who's one of the co-founders of Cooperation Jackson, has written about people's assemblies, and they talk about the two functions that assemblies can have. So the first one is around enabling community members to organise social projects together. So that could, be things like community gardens or housing projects or workers' unions. And then so that this is really, they say, this kind of helps people to come together to create survival programs, essentially. So they're supporting each other. But the other function that assemblies can have is to apply pressure on governments through things like organising campaigns, direct action, boycotts, and things like that. So they've got this kind of dual function in the eyes of Cooperation Jackson. And yeah, it's really interesting to see how assemblies are showing up in the co-op movement, because it's something that I've been learning about recently.
Because outside of Co-op News, Alice, I know you also work with a humanity project, which supports organisations to run assemblies in their own communities. So could you tell us a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, so Humanity Project is a national project in the UK, and our aim is really to seed and nurture assembly culture in the country. So we want to see assemblies as being, part of people's day-to-day lives, really. And when we talk about assemblies, we're talking about spaces where people in communities can come together to deliberate, develop relations with each other, and build power while making decisions and taking action together. And that word deliberation is quite important because it's about something that's a bit different to just casting a vote or being consulted or debating, where there's a right answer that you're trying to get through above everyone else. The process of deliberation that Humanity Project and lots of others that are working in this space are, trying to promote is it's a process where you actually start with the lived experience of an issue. So, you get people around a table, preferably in a circle, to share their experiences and build on that kind of human connection element to get to the point where you can actually make decisions together as a collective. So it's quite different to the mainstream forms of democracy that we have at the moment. So it feels like a bit of a departure, but there are there's a long history of this kind of collaborative, more deliberative forms of democracy in all over the world. I did want to share one story from Humanity Project. The most recent assembly actually that happened with a Humanity Project partner was actually run by a co-op called Marsh Farm Outreach, and they were
You can't get rid of co-ops. They pop up everywhere, don't they?
I know. Yeah. So they work on an estate called Marsh Farm in Luton, and they held their first assembly just in the past few weeks, and they had over 150 residents attend. And these residents came together in this way that I've just described to deliberate on the question of their local environment and what needs to happen to make the streets cleaner and community spaces better for the people of Marsh Farm. And also, crucially, how do we make it happen together? So that event led to three recommendations, one of which was to bring back the local market. And since the assembly, the council have actually agreed to back the proposal and are now working to reinstate the licence. So there's a real concrete, outcome that's already come from this assembly. But what's also happened is within that event, working groups were created to take some of the other recommendations forward. So the next assembly that they have later in the year, there's going to be something to build on, and that work can be reviewed and built on, and more people can get involved. So the idea of these assemblies is that it's an ongoing process that builds power in communities over time, as opposed to just one thing that happens and then it's done. It's definitely something that, should build over time. So I thought that was a really exciting example, and the fact that they're a co-op just, shows that there's so much kind of overlap in this work.
I think another way that that actually links to the last issue of Co-op News as well is because, am I right in saying Marsh Farm has got funding from Pride in Place?
Yeah, so yeah, the area that Marsh Farm operates in is one of the Pride in Place areas. So that's obviously like, a massive like draw for people to come and engage in that
Mm.
process is knowing that there are actually going to be some, resources available in this area.
So for those who don't know, the UK's Pride and Praise initiative is a government program that's going to be see up to £5 billion given to nearly 250 areas across the UK. And actually, in the article that we ran in Co-op News, the question posed by our colleague Miles was, how do you give away power and how do you actually involve communities? So it sounds like Marsh Farm have actually done this through assemblies.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that story on Pride in Place was really interesting as well. And the fact that, co-ops have been playing a part in looking at the different ways that we can involve people in these kinds of processes, I think is really exciting. I saw a quote from Francis Northrop saying that, this scheme, Pride in Place, should be seen as a project to give economic power to communities. And so the co-op movement obviously has a big role to play there. And yeah, Marsh Farm is an example of one of these co-ops that is involved in this process.
So Francis Northrop is head of community economic power at the New Economics Foundation. And what we also learned in the article is actually Co-ops UK, so it's the UK Federation for Co-ops, is represented on the Pride and Place expert reference panel and is working to ensure that communities are involved by creating things like toolkits, which is, yeah, super helpful. I understand Humanity Project has also got an event coming up in Manchester, Alice.
Yeah, so as part of the work that I'm doing in Greater Manchester with Humanity Project, we're working with lots of different organisations across Greater Manchester to try out this assembly model. But we're also part of a coalition in Greater Manchester of organisations that are working around this space of assemblies. And this consists of Humanity Project and also the Sortition Foundation, who are campaigning for a permanent Greater Manchester level citizens' assembly, and also Cooperation Manchester, who I mentioned earlier. So we're holding an event on the 21st of May in Manchester City Centre, which is a little bit off the back of the local elections that have just happened, kind of looking at what next really, and how can we look at different forms of deeper democracy beyond elections. Elections, obviously it's important to get out and vote, but what can we do beyond that? So we'll be holding that event on the 21st of May.
All of that is fantastically interesting, Alice. And there's something going on here which I think is new, which is the cross-fertilization between developments in political democracy and developments on cooperative democracy. One of the stories that caught my eye, which we haven't covered in the magazine yet, which I think we probably ought to, is that Democracy Next, which is a an outfit which promotes some of the forms of political democracy that you're talking about in terms of local communities and so on, has teamed up with the Mondragon Corporation in the Basque Country, and are launching a project to look at incorporating into all the cooperatives that are part of Mondragon, new forms of participation, new forms of direct democracy, and new forms of deliberation. And that project, which has only just got underway last year, I think is something we probably want to go back to. Uh, and I digging into that recently, I came across a fascinating paper written about 10 years ago for something called the Power Commission in the UK about 57 varieties of democratic innovation. For those who don't get the reference, 50, there was always said to be 57 varieties of different baked beans in the UK. And this paper by Graham Smith at Westminster University in London identified a whole load of new initiatives aimed at supplementing representative democracy, which was generally seen as being weakened in recent years and falling out of favour with a lot of population of only having a vote once every 4 or 5 years. And that was your only engagement with policy making and the occasional consultation. Um, Graham's also written that up into an interesting book on democratic innovations. And I think there's an interesting crossover starting to happen here of these types of innovations, which started off in political democracy mostly in North America and Europe, uh, going over into community democracy and cooperative democracy and the social and solidarity economy. And I think that's going to be something to look out for in the future.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Colin. And actually, it's great to see some of these discussions percolating within the co-op movement because I know we've talked about before about there are some fantastic examples of like data analysis and now democratic participation happening outside of co-ops that actually should be used as a tool within the wider cooperative movement. And actually, if there's anybody out there with interesting examples of participatory democracy within your own co-op or other stories that you've heard of, get in touch, let us know. You can email us directly at editorial@thenews.coop. Meanwhile, thank you very much for listening to the latest edition of Co-ops Building a Better World. Have a lovely week. We'll see you next month. And meanwhile, keep on cooperating.